being called Pakistan's memo gate. The controversy started after American-based businessman Mansoor Ijaz wrote an editorial claiming that he was part of an attempt by Pakistan's civilian administration to get an urgent message across to the American administration to try and stop and fend off apprehensions of a military takeover in Pakistan in the days after Osama bin Laden was killed in an American operation. Since then, the controversy has grabbed international headlines after Mansoor Ijaz said that the person who asked him to deliver this memo to Mike Mullen was none other than Hussein Haqqani, who has served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States of America but has since offered to resign. Hussein Haqqani says that the memo was not one that was drafted or endorsed by him. He has called Mansoor Ijaz's claims a fabrication. Mr. Ijaz has maintained that Mr. Haqqani is denying something that was discussed in detail between the two of them. To get a sense of what Memo Gate is all about, we're joined from London by Mansoor Ijaz himself. Mr. Ijaz, thanks for your time. Let me start with the basic question. You've seen the denials by Ambassador Hussein Haqqani. Do you still stick to your claim that it was indeed him who asked you to draft and deliver this memo?
Well, Burqa, first of all, it's good to be with you after so many years. I will tell you very simply, there's no matter here of claims or counterclaims. Hussein Haqqani is lying. It's just as simple as that. The data, the facts, the absolute hard evidence, if I may put it that way, the electronic evidence, the emails, the BlackBerry messages, the telephone call records, all show very clearly that Ambassador Haqqani was the architect of this entire process. And I think that the international media has two very grave responsibilities in this matter. One is to ask, what is the Pakistani government trying to cover up? Why? And what are they hiding, basically?
Mansoor Ijaz, the question has been raised in Pakistan and in Pakistani media as to why someone who was pretty well connected, like Hussein Haqqani, he knew everybody on Capitol Hill, would need you to pass on a message to the American administration.
Yeah. So you can imagine that these were the very tense days after Osama bin Laden had been killed on Pakistani soil in an American raid, a unilateral American raid. You can imagine that there were stresses in the system at that time that none of us, outside at least, could fathom. We don't know what conversations were taking place between General Kayani, General Pasha, President Asif Zardari, the Prime Minister, and so forth. And when Haqqani reached out to me, I had not spoken to him for months prior to. In fact, the last interaction that Haqqani and I had had was when he spoke at one of my charitable fundraisers in New York. And since that time, we had not spoken at all. We had had one or two what I would call friendly type BlackBerry exchanges. And when he reached out to me on that day, he was here in London as well. And his first, shall we say, initial stanza in the conversation we had was, I'm coming to you because you are a plausibly deniable channel for us. If in these days, I'm not talking about May 9th, 10th, 11th, prior to the meeting with Admiral Mullen taking place in the United States, if in these days, God forbid, this information gets public or gets known somehow or the other, that the civilian government is trying to go around the ISI and the Army to prevent their pressure from getting too high, if that happens, then you are a plausibly deniable channel, because everybody knows you and President Zardari are not close. Everybody knows you have anti-Army and anti-ISI publicly recorded statements. So there's no possibility anybody would believe that they would, in fact, that we would have come to you to ask you to do this. That was part one. Part two was that you're the only guy I know who can get the message to Mullen through the back channel quickly enough, and that's because Hussein Haqqani knew very well who my friends in Washington are and how well I know them, how much they trust me, and how quickly I could deliver that message, in fact, if it was necessary to do so.
So let me get the drift of what you're arguing. You're saying that while at another time Hussein Haqqani could have got the message across directly. He used you as a kind of fig leaf, as a kind of character whom he could distance himself from later, and that was the reason he used you as an interlocutor. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I agreed. In fact, we discussed this for probably of our 20-minute conversation the first time. We discussed this for at least 5 minutes, and I told him, I said, okay, if the stress is that bad, and you know, when Hussein first got on the phone with me that day, there was a great deal of stress in his voice. I have to be very candid with your viewers in telling you that this was a man who you could tell was trying to defend his president, his government from a real, or whether it was real or perceived threat, I don't know, but he was certainly of the view that the threat was real. So, you know, I agreed to take that role on and to, you know, go further up the channel on the U.S. side and see whether they would be willing to accept it, because I knew that if something went wrong, there would be a need for plausible deniability. It would be necessary for Zardari and Haqqani to be able to say, we didn't do this, because the ramifications of that would be huge. Today, it's a different story, and frankly, I don't understand why they're lying about it and why they're trying to cover it up. I think there is something much darker and deeper that they're trying to hide, and I don't know why the international journalistic community is not taking a harder look at that aspect of this story.
If this was meant to be all about plausible deniability, to use your phrase, a phrase you said Hussein Haqqani used with you, why did you out what was clearly a confidential process? Yeah,
that's a fair question, and it's important that the viewers understand. I write editorial pieces 2 or 3 times a year in some of the more important newspapers and journals around the world. When I do it, I usually try to create what I would call an anecdotal entry to the op-ed piece, something that indicates why what I'm about to write as a policy prescription is important. So with the Financial Times, which is probably, if not the most important newspaper, certainly one of the 2 most important newspapers in the world, when you write for that comment page, you have to have a certain authenticity with which you write. So my policy prescription was that the ISI has gotten out of control. We need to find a way to now help the Pakistani civilian government deal with that. And the United States ought to take the lead role. And in my piece I said that Section S of the ISI, which is this, what we call the strategic section, which deals with these kinds of problems in Afghanistan and, you know, other Kashmir and things like that that they do, that Section S should be labeled as a terrorist organization. That was the prescription in my op-ed piece. Now, in order to get that right, in order to write the defense of Admiral Mullen's statements on September 22nd in his final Senate Armed Services Committee interview or testimony, I needed to give authenticity to the piece, and in fact, it was in my hands because the memorandum, which was dictated to me by Ambassador Haqqani, had been passed through me to the Americans. So I used the memo as a mechanism of authenticity for the piece, so I could bring out that specific line, point number 5 in the 6 points that were offered, that the new national security team of Pakistan would ensure that Section S of the ISI got shut down.
That's a really huge piece of news, and I have the memo in front of me as reproduced by Foreign Policy on its website. But questions have been raised about the credibility and the authenticity of the memo because it does not have a letterhead, it does not have a signature. If you are going to put something down in writing, which is pretty odd to begin with, because one would imagine that such sensitive stuff should be conveyed orally or on BBM, which can't be encrypted. You put something down in writing, but there's no signature, no letterhead. How do you explain that?
Yeah. So I've done these type of interventions on at least 3 previous occasions. You know very well because you helped to cover what I did in Kashmir. I did the same thing in the Sudan. When governments talk to each other in private channels, they never, ever put those documents on letterheads or under signature. They're referred to in the diplomatic jargon, if I may put it that way, as non-papers. When the U.S. government threatened the Sudan in 1995 or 96, I forget exactly when it was that happened, that threat was made on a non-paper. It was handed to the president of Sudan by the U.S. ambassador who was resident in Khartoum at the time. It was on a white piece of paper. It was typed literally on a typewriter. It was typed out. It was actually issued by the CIA. I can tell you that because I know that in that particular case, because I know the document. It was issued by the CIA. It was sent by telex to the embassy in Khartoum, printed on a white piece of paper and handed to the president of Sudan to say, read this. And this is from my president. And that's exactly how these things work. Now, Haqqani, in this case, Haqqani wanted me initially to deliver the message verbally to my big guys in America, who would then tell Admiral Mullen what was going on. But when I went to all three of the people, two of them, one of them was a current U.S. government officer. The other one was, the second one was a very senior politician, and the third one was a very senior military guy. And each of the three said to me, we had in our jargon, if you read the BBM exchanges and all of that very carefully, you will see that we referred to the hard, the middle, and the soft option. So the hard option was the politician said, I will only take this up the flagpole if Zardari sends it to me himself in the form of a letter signed on letterhead. That was the hard option. Politicians always want to cover their backs. The soft option was Haqqani would make a telephone call to my interlocutor with me on the line, and without him stating his name, he would simply speak to my interlocutor to make sure that Admiral Mullen knew what needed to be, what he needed to have. And the middle option was the one we used in the end, which was Haqqani would tell me, but he would have to put it in writing. We would have to put it in writing. We would put it in writing and send it to my interlocutor. And my interlocutor insisted not just to have it in writing, but to have my factual verification that Haqqani did, in fact, have the approval of the President of Pakistan before this memorandum went to Admiral Mullen.
But can I ask you, if we sort of take you completely at face value, how do you explain why Admiral Mike Mullen says that when he got this memo, and he confirms that he did receive such a memo, he didn't think it was credible, so he didn't act on it?
Yeah. So the answer to that is very simple. I didn't think it was particularly credible. I asked Hussein over and over and over again whether or not he really thought the American government could buy into these kinds of offers, because essentially it was redrafting the architecture of how Pakistan ran its entire framework of governance, yeah, and how it interacted with the United States. I can tell you, go read the BBM messages very clearly. I don't remember which one it is and where it occurs, but in one of them, there's a statement that says something to the effect of, my friend in the U.S. Insists on having it in writing because there have been many bad experiences with Pakistani verbal offers in the recent past, and he will not take it up the flagpole without that. And then later in the same BBM stream, if you will, I think it was the 9th or the 10th of May, there was a point at which, after I had delivered the approved draft of this memorandum to my interlocutor in the United States, his response to me was, nobody's going to believe that the Pakistanis can deliver on any of this. So all of that doubt, if I may put it that way, was in our own writing, in our own communications on May 9th and 10th. But the Pakistani offer, what Haqqani told me, the way he explained it to me was, the Pakistani offers had to be of such a magnitude that the Americans would then take immediate action to ensure that there would not be any military encroachment on the civilian government.
But if you thought yourself that what you were writing out was not very credible, why did you agree to be part of this exercise?
Credibility is in the eye of the beholder.